Yeah, you know, I was thinking about how when you were talking about the movie, there was a documentary I saw several years ago about the Brazilian sugarcane cutters. And he describes exactly what you're saying. These people who are cutting canes, very, very arduous work. They were singing as they did. There was a rhythmic kind of dancing to it. And of course, we know from history about the slave South in the United States that slave songs were produced, hymns and so on, in relation to the work we did. So even under the most oppressive conditions of chattel slavery, people do have this sort of utopian aspiration that they express. And that becomes the basis of what we consider culture. I mean, American root music is inconceivable without those slave songs, which later fed into jazz and so on and so forth. I think you're very right about that.
I guess, I don't know if people want to stay. I have something brief to say. But just, thanks for your comments. And I agree with you. There's a risk in terms of, if we're thinking about a plurality of utopias and presenting them, presenting capitalist utopia and socialist utopia without having a very grounded in political economy and in our own historical situation, that type of utopia. But I wish he hadn't left, because I was going to say something about, isn't the problem that we have this very robust capitalist utopia where you can buy 27 things, but just to be very blunt, that doesn't work. Trying to fulfill oneself through, not to say that there's not creative ways to do that. I think what you were saying shows the inadequacy of a purely consumerist understanding of what utopia is. The people who try to really express themselves through buying and only buying, it ends up in alienation and dissatisfaction. If we read Naomi Klein in No Logo, which I think is a great book, she talks about how when she was a kid, she just wanted to buy, go to the guest store, and how that was going to really allow her to express her individuality. And then she shows how not only through her own experience, but through sort of teens all over the world, that doesn't hack it. And they start, people realize they can't express themselves through brands.
Yeah.
So they try to undermine it, they try to get creative with brands. So what's really interesting is that I find that most of my students really have never had any experience with trying to think of a real deep conception of thinking of their labor and themselves as art. Sure, they paint pretty pictures in art class, but that's not, really trying to, express yourself and think about how you fit into your larger environment and how the environment affects yourself and how you have to affect the environment to in fact affect yourself. And really, in thinking about human beings as species beings, people really don't have any experience of that. They don't get it through work. They don't get it at all in their high school experience. And maybe through what we're both talking about, I think this is a commonality of really working to have a thorough understanding of what utopia for the self and utopia for the world, and how that might be intertwined, and how that might be necessitated upon certain social structures and certain paths of history. That would be something that would be revolutionary. So that's all I have to say.
I was just thinking, just kind of briefly myself, I wanted to comment on that, what that guy was saying about consumer utopia. And the fact is, I'm just thinking, he mentioned how that situation is slowly, right next to be realistic, demanding possible, part of the imagination. This is May 68. Well, the Situationists in France were the only people that I know at that time when there was a Watts rebellion, and these people in the hood just went to the streets and took all these TV, et cetera, and just had a riot. That they celebrated this as a kind of a consumer utopia backfiring, imploding on itself. Because, you're supposed to get all these goods, but you're supposed to go and work laboriously and actively and productively to get them. But they completely said, fuck it, we're going to just go directly to the place and get them. And I think that when you cut through that kind of capitalist mediation and actually take the promise of consumer paradise utopia seriously and just act upon it, you do have riots and rebellions. And this is even before the capitalist period, when we talk about, for example, 19th century Japan, the transition point between feudalism and capitalism, when the black ships carried arrived on the shore. A lot of the peasants had these riots where they would go to the merchants' houses and just take what they needed, sake or rice, and they would dance at the same time, because this was part of their religious customs, to go to the shrine. And of course, when something apocalyptic or disaster like happened, like the arrival of Black Ship after 300 years of isolation, then they sort of access their own religious traditions and imagination, and that breaks out into pilgrimages and so on and so forth, which is not exactly the same as a revolution, but it is an act of rebelling against these emerging systems of oppression. And I think those things have to be acknowledged and legitimated, regardless of where they are. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for listening. I'll clap for us.
Yeah.
Just the two